I first want to begin by thanking some parents and grandparents out there, the Schrenks and the Costanzos. I don't know if you're anywhere where you can wave to me. Where are you? There you are. I want to thank them because they were responsible for some of the most important learning I did today. They gave up their daughter, Kristen, for a full hour so she could teach me, based on her research as a student teacher, how splendid the program that all of you are graduating from today is. You are extraordinarily fortunate. Kristen, you have persuaded me that the Pennsylvania State University, quite simply, has one of the preeminent programs for preparing teachers in the country, and I hope you feel the pride in yourselves that I feel in you. Thank you, Shanks. Thank you, Costanzos. All right, that was the good news. Here's the tough news. You are about to enter the most glorious, the most indispensable, and the toughest profession on the face of the earth. Teaching is extraordinarily difficult, and the reason it's difficult is because it's so closely connected to learning. You know, if those students weren't there, it would be a piece of cake. Ask their faculty. Learning is complicated in part because knowledge is so much more complicated than a lot of people think it is, especially if you want people to understand and not just to know. A second reason is that learning is invisible. When you're teaching students, a light bulb does not, in fact, show up atop their head when they understand. Students who think they understand don't. Students who think they don't understand really have it all put together and need a little encouragement. It's all invisible, and we are responsible, you and I, we teachers, for working on a complex phenomenon that is cloaked in Harry Potter's cloak of invisibility, and we've got to figure out what's going on inside. And for those reasons, learning is inherently unpredictable and uncertain. Now, what does it mean for life to be uncertain? One of my favorite examples of that is the story of the hiking area in the backwoods of Montana, where over the previous few months they'd had some very frightening encounters between hikers and bears. And so they printed up and circulated to everybody hiking into the backcountry a memo that everyone had to read before going off into the wilderness. And the memo said, you know, we've had some serious problems with bears, and you really have to prepare yourself for encounters with bears. And the way to prepare yourself is, first of all, don't walk quickly, walk slowly. They don't like to be surprised. But also, you should wear jackets with lots of small bells sewn on them, because the bells will warn the bears of your approach. And just in case that doesn't work, it's useful to have some pepper spray in a spray container with you. Okay, bells, pepper spray. It went on. It said, now, there are really two kinds of bears you have to watch out for. First of all, there are the brown bears. They're not all that dangerous. You can tell that you're on a path that brown bears are on by the bear droppings. They tend to be small, symmetrical, round, brown. And then there are grizzly bears. Grizzly bears are also often on these trails, and you can tell their droppings by a proliferation of small bells and a distinct smell of pepper. That's what teaching's like. You think you've prepared for everything, and some kid in the class comes up with the equivalent of little bells and the smell of pepper. And we as teachers have to be ready for everything. That's why our job is so wonderful. That's why it's so important. And that's why its attraction is the same as its anxiety-provoking character. It's uncertain. It's hard to do. Now, the difficulty of learning how to teach wouldn't be such a big problem were it not so very important in the world. The fact is, it's the most important professional role in our society. And just last week, I saw another affirmation of that. One of my favorite columnists in the New York Times, my favorite columnists are often the ones I more frequently disagree with than agree with, is David Brooks. And David Brooks wrote a column called The Cognitive Age. And Brooks was talking about how everybody explains all of the world's problems with reference to globalization, to trade, to whether our trade is open or closed. You folks had a primary election quite recently here, and I'm sure what you heard mostly from the two candidates who were here was about globalization. That's where the big problem is. And David Brooks said, you know, that's not where the big problem is. Brooks says the central process driving our crisis is not globalization, it's the skills revolution. We're moving into a more demanding cognitive age where, in order to thrive, people are compelled to become better at absorbing, processing, and combining information. This is happening locally and it's happening globally. And it would be happening whether every free trade agreement that had ever been proposed had been signed. The globalization paradigm emphasizes the fact that information can now travel 15,000 miles in a nanosecond. But the most important part of an information's journey is the last few inches, the space between a person's eyes or ears and their brain. Well, friends, that is the key. Brooks says, does an individual have the capacity to understand the information? Do they have the training to exploit it? That's the cognitive age. And he says the cognitive age doesn't depend on economists. It depends on people whose specialty is pedagogy, culture, and psychology. It depends on the world's, the nation's teachers. Not on our stockbrokers, not on our hedge fund managers, but on teachers. Who's the surgeon responsible for this operation that brings the information, those last few inches, from the screen or the page into the brain? That surgeon is called a teacher. Who's the engineer responsible for building the bridges between that brain and the variety of ways in which students have to apply information to make it useful to the rest of the world? That engineer, that bridge builder is called a teacher. Who's responsible for being the kind of model of humanity that will encourage the people who have that information and understand it to use it with integrity, with honesty, with responsibility? Well, that minister or priest or rabbi is a teacher. That's why this is the most important role in the world. It's because I think David Brooks is right. I think the 21st century will be the age of understanding. Not globalization, not the economy, not oil, not gas, but understanding. And you, my dear colleagues, sitting in blue, a beautiful sea of blue before me, you are the agents of understanding. If you fail, no economist, no financial specialist, no politician will save this democracy. Now, when I say that information is invisible and complex, most folks out there, even your parents, grandparents, spouses, children, and friends, don't begin to understand how the simplest fact is more complicated than it is. I love to come to a group of folks and ask them, do you know elementary school arithmetic? And they all say, well, sure, and they begin to recite their times tables for me. There's no melody for that like there is ABCs, so it's usually a little duller than reciting the alphabet. And I said, well, let me give you a test. One question. Now, people begin to sweat when you put arithmetic and test together in the same sentence. I say, how do you divide a fraction by a fraction? They look at me. They say, I learned that in 4th grade. And I say, yeah, so how do you do it? They say, invert and multiply. And then I ask them, why? Why is it that when you multiply fractions, multiplication makes them smaller, and you divide fractions, division makes them bigger? And they look at me and they say, we have no idea. And I say, you learned it is not yours to reason why, just invert and multiply. Didn't you? Yeah, And the fact is, 4th grade teachers understand why that works. And if you don't, work on it this evening, guys. But the simplest fact, the invisibility of knowledge. I was teaching a group of future history teachers who were student teaching, and one of them said, I was teaching my world history class. Anybody here? How many history teachers are there? Of course, all elementary teachers are history teachers too, so, all right. And there were world history. In California, where I live, we call that class from Plato to NATO. And you do it fast, one semester. And so she was teaching the entire Protestant Reformation in 3 days. And she was such a good teacher, she got done in 2.5. And so there was time to talk to the students. And it was clear they all got it. They understand the Reformation. And then one student in the back raises his hand and says, well, there is one thing I'm a little confused about. I understand about Martin Luther. I understand how he knocked those 95 theses, onto the doors of the church. But what I don't understand is how we go through an entire unit on Martin Luther and never talk about his impact on black people in his famous speech, I Have a Dream. 300 years this way or that way, pretty soon you've got historical error. But the fact is, unless a teacher had known to engage the students in discussion, to talk about what they knew, the invisibility of knowledge would have made that a persistent misunderstanding in the minds of students. Another thing that we have to teach our students, because we're a democracy, is to understand that knowledge is fragile. And it is always true from a particular perspective. But we have to teach our students in a democracy that you must always leave open the possibility that a view other than your own may have truth in it as well. And that's why in our classrooms, we emphasize the importance of students learning not only to speak their mind, but to listen to the minds of others. I think I understood this best about 10 years ago when I was in China. I was in Beijing, and I was being taken on a tour of the University of Beijing by a former student of mine. Min Weifang is his name. He's now the vice chancellor, we would call that the president of Beijing University. He took me for a walk around a lake in the middle of their campus. And he said, do you see anything interesting about this lake? I hate open-ended questions like that. I wanted multiple choice, but they don't use them in China. And I said, no, it's a beautiful lake, fish in the lake. He said, let's stop here on the shore. "Can you see the whole lake?" And I looked around, and I realized I could not see the whole lake. There were several inlets that were invisible to me. He said, "Let's keep walking." We kept walking for another 5 minutes. "Now can you see what you didn't see before?" I said, "Yes, I can. But can you see what you could see before?" And I couldn't. And he turned to me and he said, "Lee, I learned this from you, but now we represent it physically. Our lake is like human knowledge. No one person can see all of it at the same time by standing in the same place. We only can attain full knowledge by collaborating in our understandings or by learning constantly from others." And he smiled and said, "I learned that during my years studying in the United States democracy, and someday we will have more than only a lake to represent that here in my country." That's something we teach. It's something we teach every time we turn to a student and say, "Do you have another opinion?" Every time we encourage a student who's the only one in a class who thinks differently from everyone else, and we say, "I don't care if there's only one of you has a different view, let's hear it." That's what it means to teach democracy in 2nd grade or 5th grade or 12th grade. Now, let me just talk only to the graduates. Nobody else need pay attention. All this knowledge that you've gained at Penn State, you've gotten, I don't know you personally, but I can just look out and tell you're a lot smarter than you were when you graduated from high school. You've gained so much understanding. That's the good news. In some ways, even better news is you don't own that knowledge. It is not yours to keep. That knowledge is only valuable when you, as teachers, give it away. You don't hoard it. You don't put it in a bank. You don't store it in the diploma that you hang on the wall. Our secret as teachers is we are the wealthiest people in the world because the more we give away our knowledge, the more we've got, the wealthier we are. The stockbrokers can't say that. The bankers can't say that. But we can. We get richer by giving it away. And I ask all of us here to realize what an incredible investment these young people represent. There are about 350 of you out there. Over the course of the next 4 or 5 years, these 350 teachers will educate more than 100,000 youngsters. Folks, that's better than investing in Google. I know, I didn't. From 300 to 100,000 in less than 5 years. That's what it means to invest in tomorrow's teachers. So, my fellow educators, welcome to this profession. Welcome to this life of uncertainty. Think of it. You can have uncertainty every day and never have to go anywhere near Vegas. You can gamble every day, find out whether you've got the winning gamble or not by asking the students what they understand. It is a profession whose excitement is unsurpassed and whose rewards are beyond the rewards of gold, of rubies, of even gasoline. Go out, teach brilliantly, teach persistently, teach courageously, even though you know that at some unexpected time as you teach, you will encounter a proliferation of small bells and just the slightest whiff of pepper. Congratulations. Thank you.